Welcome to the channel. We are grateful to have you joining this peaceful space. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe, activate the bell icon, and leave a gentle comment with your thoughts or requests for future stories. Now, settle in, relax your shoulders, and let the soothing rhythm of this journey carry you toward a peaceful night's sleep. Please close your eyes, get comfortable, and let your breathing slow down. Feel the weight of your body gently sinking into the bed, as if the mattress were a quiet shore and you are slowly resting along a calm riverbank. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to solve. In this long and very gentle sleep story, we will explore the soft, distant world of the Egyptian gods, their quiet cycles, and their patient way of understanding time, death, and eternity. The pace will be slow, the images simple, and everything will be designed to help your mind drift away. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, activate the bell icon, and leave a comment telling me what story you'd like me to create next. Now, let your eyes grow heavier with each breath and just listen as we travel together into a calm, ancient landscape along the Nile. Along a long ribbon of water flowing through the desert, life slowly took root. The Nile moved in predictable rhythms, rising and falling with the seasons, covering the fields with dark, fertile soil, and then retreating, leaving behind the ground ready for sowing. To the people who lived on its banks, this steady pulse was not just a practical resource. It was a sign that the world itself followed a reliable pattern, a quiet agreement between water, earth, and sky. Beyond the narrow green strip of fields, the desert stretched out in pale silence. To one side lay the rising sun and the promise of a new day. To the other, the setting sun and the realm of the dead. The Egyptians learned to read this landscape as if it were a vast, slow-moving text. The fertile valley, the golden sand, the yearly flood, and the clear sky all seem to speak of order, balance, and gentle repetition. Over many centuries, this environment shaped not only their daily lives, but also their imagination. They watched the river return, the crops grow again, the stars cross the night sky in regular patterns, and the sun repeat its journey every day. From these steady cycles, they developed a way of thinking in which nothing truly vanished without leaving a trace. Things might sink, rest, or disappear from sight, but they could appear again in a different form, at a different time, in a quieter realm. As villages grew into towns, and towns into cities, the Egyptians built temples and tombs from stone and filled them with painted scenes and carved signs. These were not only decorations, they were ways of fixing memory into the walls, of recording myths, prayers, and names so they could endure beyond a single lifetime. The desire to preserve and continue life after death became one of the deepest threads running through their culture. For the Egyptians, mythology was not a separate category of fantasy. It was simply another way of describing the patterns they saw in nature and society. The stories of gods and goddesses gave shape to ideas about creation, justice, kingship, and the afterlife. They did not keep these stories locked away. They carved them into temple reliefs, wrote them on papyri, painted them on coffins, and acted them out in festivals that marked the turning of the year. Unlike later traditions that collected their sacred stories into a single book, Egyptian myths were scattered across many sources. In the oldest pyramids, prayers and spells were carved into the walls to help the king rise to the stars. These inscriptions are now known as the pyramid texts. Later, similar writings appeared on wooden coffins belonging to nobles and officials, becoming the coffin texts. Still later, long papyrus rolls were placed beside the dead, containing collections of spells that we call the Book of the Dead, though the original title was closer to Book of Coming Forth by Day. All of these writings dealt mainly with the afterlife, guidance for the journey beyond death. But woven through them are hints of older tales, how the world began, how the gods organized the sky, the earth, and the waters, and how they handled conflict among themselves. From brief allusions, from temple walls, from hymns and ritual texts, scholars have patiently pieced together a broader picture of Egyptian mythology that stretches over 3,000 years. Throughout this long history, one idea remained steady. The Egyptians believed that the universe was held together by a principle of rightness and balance. They called it Maat. It was both a concept and a goddess. As an idea, Maat was the proper arrangement of things. Truth instead of deception, fairness instead of cruelty, harmony instead of disruption. As a goddess, she was imagined as a calm woman wearing a single feather on her head, the feather that would later be used in the weighing of the heart. Maat was not a rigid law imposed from outside. It was the natural way for the world to function well. The sun followed Maat when it rose and set according to its path. The Nile followed Maat when it flooded at the right time. A just ruler followed Maat when he judged carefully and cared for the land. An ordinary person followed Maat when they spoke honestly, honored their parents, treated others with kindness, and respected the gods and the dead. Kingship, religion, ethics, and cosmology were all linked by this quiet principle. To harm the weak, to lie, to steal, or to disturb the offerings for the dead was not only a social fault. It was a small fracture in the fabric of the universe. Too many such fractures would invite the return of chaos, the undoing of order. To live in accordance with Maat was to support the structure that allowed everyone to exist in relative safety and stability. This connection between personal behavior and cosmic stability gave Egyptian life a special tone. Even small choices were meaningful. A farmer who weighed grain fairly, a scribe who wrote contracts honestly, a judge who listened to both sides, all were participating in their ordinary way in the maintenance of the universe. The myths of the gods, engraved in stone, were grand reflections of these same patterns at a larger scale. When we listen to Egyptian mythology as a sleep story, we are listening not just to tales of strange beings with animal heads. We are listening to a quiet meditation on how order might arise from confusion, how life might continue after death, and how the actions of each person might echo beyond their own time. Everything moves slowly, like the river. Everything returns, like the flood. Everything rests, like a body in a tomb prepared with care. In this gentle framework, the gods are not far removed. They are present in the sunlight, in the stars, in the rising of the moon, in the shape of the land and the pattern of society. Temples mark places where their presence feels especially concentrated. Tombs mark places where individuals hope to stay close to this ordered world even after death. Mythology in this setting becomes less a collection of magical tales and more a soft language for describing how existence might hold together. To understand the world of the Egyptian gods, we can start at the very beginning, before there was land, before there were people, before even the sun rose. In their imagination, the Egyptians pictured an endless stretch of dark water. There was no shore and no wind, no waves and no light. This calm, bottomless expanse was called none. It was not evil. It was simply unformed, a quiet potential without shape. Out of this stillness, something changed. Just as the Nile recedes after the flood and small islands of earth appear, the Egyptians imagined a first mound of land gently emerging from the surface of none. It rose like a sandbank, showing itself above the water. This first piece of solid ground became a central image in their thinking. It symbolized the moment when unshaped possibility began to take on form, when the world started to become distinguishable. On this primeval mound, in one important tradition, the creator god appeared. In the city of Heliopolis, he was called Atum. He was described as having brought himself into existence, without parents or earlier beings. Complete in himself, he contained the potential for all later things. Standing alone on the first land, he began the slow work of creating structure, separating what had been mixed and giving names to what had been nameless. The first phase of his activity was expressed through a divine family. From Atum came a pair of deities, Shu, associated with dry air and empty space, and Tefnut, associated with moisture and dampness. The Egyptians used physical images to describe their birth, but what mattered most was the idea. Air and moisture, dryness and wetness were now separated from the undifferentiated waters of noon. The simple act of distinction was an important step toward order. Shu and Tefnut, in this story, became the parents of the earth and the sky. The earth was Geb, a reclining figure, often shown with plants growing from his body. The sky was Nut, a long, arched figure stretching above him, her body covered in stars. At first, they were imagined closely joined, but the Creator wished to create space between them. Shu, as air, lifted Nut away, forming the vault of the heavens, while Geb lay below, becoming the ground on which all living things would stand. The space between earth and sky became the world we know, the realm of air, clouds, wind, breath, and human life. In this simple arrangement, the Egyptians found a calm explanation for their surroundings. Above was Nut, studded with stars. Below was Geb, with his fields and mountains. Between them, life moved and rested. In this environment, the Nile, the plants, the animals, and eventually people could exist, supported by the continued presence of the gods. From the union of Geb and Nut came a group of gods that would become central to many myths: Osiris, Isis, Seth, Nephthys, and sometimes an elder form of Horus. This group was called the Ennead of Heliopolis, the group of 9. They represented not only cosmic forces, but also patterns of family life. Loving partners, protective mothers, difficult brothers, and rightful heirs. Later stories about kingship, justice, and the afterlife would grow out of their relationships. Heliopolis was not the only place where Egyptians told the story of creation. In the city of Hermopolis, priests developed a different vision. They focused on the state of the universe before the first mound rose. Instead of a single undifferentiated water, they spoke of 8 primeval deities in 4 pairs of male and female. Each pair represented an aspect of the pre-creation state: darkness, hiddenness, unboundedness, and the deep waters themselves. These 8 beings were often shown with frog and serpent heads, suggesting a time before the world had taken on familiar human and animal forms. Together, they stirred the still waters and brought about a new stage. In some versions, they produced a cosmic egg that floated on the surface of none. In others, they helped raise a mound on which a young sun god appeared. When the egg cracked or the god rose, light spread over the first horizon, and time began. This young sun god was linked with several names. Sometimes he was called Ra, the powerful midday sun. Sometimes he was Khepri, like the scarab that pushes its ball of earth across the ground, symbolizing the rising sun. In any case, his appearance marked a turning point. Darkness was no longer uninterrupted. The regular cycle of day and night could now begin, and the gentle movement of the sun across the sky could set the rhythm for life. In the city of Memphis, another group of priests developed a more abstract view. For them, the creator god was Ta. He did not shape the world with physical actions, but with thought and speech. They said that Ta conceived everything and every being in his heart, understood here as the seat of mind, and then brought them into actuality through his tongue. The organs of thought and voice were the tools of creation. In this theology, even other creator gods, like Atum, were included within Ptah's plan. They were ideas in his heart before they appeared as actors in the stories told in other cities. By combining the concrete images from Heliopolis and Hermopolis with their own more conceptual approach, the Memphite priests created a layered picture: a god who thinks the world, speaks it, and allows other gods to enact different aspects of the same underlying design. Beyond these main centers, other towns emphasized different creative acts. At Elephantine, near the southern border of Egypt, the ram-headed god Khnum was believed to shape humans on a potter's wheel, forming their bodies from clay taken from the Nile and carefully crafting each person. In another tradition, the goddess Neith, associated with weaving, was said to create the world as if it were a textile, interlacing threads of existence into a coherent pattern. During the New Kingdom, the god Amun of Thebes rose to particular prominence. Initially associated with air and hiddenness, he eventually fused with the sun god to become Amun-Ra, a transcendent creator whose presence was felt everywhere, even when unseen. Hymns describe him as the one who is hidden in all things, the invisible foundation of the visible world, praised by kings and commoners alike in grand temples surrounded by columns and obelisks. When we look at these many creation stories side by side, we might be tempted to ask which one the Egyptians really believed. But they did not insist on a single, exclusive account. For them, each story highlighted a different aspect of a reality too large to capture in one narrative. One focused on family relationships among gods, another on the primordial qualities of the unformed world, another on the power of thought and speech. Together, they formed a calm cluster of views that could coexist without anxiety. Certain motifs repeat gently across these traditions. Creation begins from water and darkness. A first mound or structure rises. A creator, alone at first, brings forth other beings. Light appears. The sky is separated from the earth. The sun begins its journey. These patterns are recognizable even when the names of gods change. They reflect a deep trust that form can emerge from formlessness, that distinction can arise from blending, and that these changes can happen in a measured, peaceful way. One striking feature is that the Egyptians did not usually imagine creation as a making of things out of absolute nothing. Instead, the creator gods organize what is already there. They separate, shape, and name. The dark waters of none are not destroyed. They remain in the background, a reservoir of potential. The gods do not erase chaos completely. They hold it back, keeping enough distance to allow land, sky, and life to remain stable. This way of thinking matches their experience of the Nile. Each year, the flood spread muddy water over the fields, blurring boundaries. Each year, people dug channels, raised dikes, and prepared basins to guide and contain it. They did not stop the river. They worked with it, directing it just enough to make it useful. Creation, in their imagination, worked in the same way. The Creator did not reject the waters. He shaped them into something habitable. As time passed, the different cosmogonies did not disappear in favor of a single official version. Instead, they became interwoven. Priests in one city might acknowledge the creator of another as a different aspect of their own. Hymns could praise several creator gods in sequence, treating them as various faces of a single, mysterious source. In this soft harmonizing, we see again the Egyptian preference for multiplicity within unity, for a world in which several explanations can sit quietly side by side. Listening to these creation stories at night, as you drift towards sleep, you might imagine the surface of dark water, empty and calm. Slowly, a low shape rises, barely breaking the surface. Light grows in one corner of the sky, and a simple landscape begins to appear. A strip of land, a pale horizon, a faint blue arch above. There is no rush. Each element takes its place, like pieces of a puzzle gently settling, until the scene feels complete enough to support life. In this way, Egyptian cosmogonies offer not only an explanation for how things began, but also a quiet reassurance. If order came once from formlessness, it can come again. If land rose once from the flood, new stability can emerge after each disturbance. Creation is not a loud explosion, but a slow, patient lifting, separating and arranging. It is a story told in very small steps, repeated each day as the sun rises and each year as the river returns to its banks. When the Egyptians looked at their world, they did not see a single, simple force behind everything. Instead, they sensed many kinds of presence, each with its own rhythm and character. To describe these presences, they imagined a wide community of gods and goddesses. Some were linked with the sun and the sky, some with the river and the fields, some with protection, wisdom, or quiet guidance after death. Together, they formed a pantheon, a calm society of divine beings, reflected in the slow patterns of nature. At the heart of this community stood the sun god. Under his most common name, Ra, he crossed the sky each day from east to west. In the early hours, he rose gently above the horizon, a young and growing light. At noon, he reached his highest point, strong and clear. In the evening, he sank toward the west, his light softening and fading. The Egyptians gave different names to these moments, calling him Khepri at dawn and Atum at dusk. But they understood that all these forms belonged to the same enduring presence. Ra was often imagined as a falcon-headed figure with a solar disk resting above his head. From this high, watchful position, he saw the entire land, the river winding through its narrow valley, the fields, and the people working in them. His light was not simply a physical fact. It was a sign that order still held, that the world continued to function according to its quiet rules. Each sunrise meant that the struggles of the night had been overcome once again. Close to Ra in importance, but focused on a different dimension of existence, was Osiris. Where Ra represented the daily rhythm of light and time, Osiris embodied the slower cycle of life, death, and renewal. In art, he appeared as a wrapped figure, holding a crook and flail, symbols of guidance and authority. His skin was often painted green, recalling plants and fertile soil. He was not a god of sudden change, but of patient transformation, the kind that turned seeds into crops and the dead into beings with a new, quieter existence. Isis, his partner, was one of the most beloved goddesses in the Egyptian world. She was shown as a woman with a throne sign on her head, or sometimes with the horns of a cow and a solar disk. She embodied loyalty, care, and subtle intelligence. Myths told how she searched for Osiris, healed the sick, protected children, and used sacred names to restore balance. For ordinary people, Isis represented the reassuring idea that someone wise and attentive could intervene when things went wrong. Their son Horus linked divine patterns directly to human kingship. He was usually depicted with a falcon's head, standing upright, crowned, and composed. The sky itself was sometimes described as his body, with the sun and moon as his eyes. Each living pharaoh was considered an earthly Horus, not in a loud or theatrical way, but as a steady principle. The ruler should see widely, protect the land, and maintain order, just as Horus guarded Egypt in myth. Seth, brother of Osiris, represented forces that were harder to control. He was associated with the desert, sudden storms, and foreign lands. His animal form is difficult to classify, with a long snout and squared ears, reflecting his ambiguous nature. In many narratives, he opposed Osiris and Horus, creating tension and disruption. Yet, in other contexts, he served as a defender of Ra's boat during the dangerous hours of the night. the Egyptians accepted that even disturbing forces could be turned toward the protection of the world. Nephthys, sister of Isis, stood in the background of many rituals. She appeared alongside Isis at funerary scenes, helping to guard and comfort the deceased. While Isis represented active restoration, Nephthys often embodied quiet presence at the edge of life and death, the gentle support that accompanies endings and transitions. Together, the two sisters formed a protective frame around Osiris, and by extension, around every human burial carried out in his pattern. Anubis, with the head of a jackal, watched over the moment when body and spirit began to part. Jackals walked among tombs in the desert, and rather than fearing them, Egyptians transformed this image into something protective. Anubis supervised mummification, guided the deceased toward the place of judgment, and made sure that the physical form was properly prepared for the long rest. His black color recalled the dark, fertile soil of the Nile, hinting at the possibility of renewal even in stillness. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, represented thought, writing, and the calm observation of cycles. He was said to have invented hieroglyphs and to keep accounts of the god's actions, including the weighing of hearts in the afterlife. Associated with the moon, he marked time during the night and balanced the solar light of Ra with a softer, reflective glow. Priests and scribes honored him, seeing in him the model of careful speech, measured judgment, and accurate record-keeping. Hathor added warmth and joy to the pantheon. She was linked with music, dance, beauty, and maternal care. She welcomed the dead as a nurturing presence, sometimes emerging from the trunk of a tree to offer water to the thirsty. In art, she could appear as a cow, as a woman with cow's ears, or with a sun disk between horns. Her presence indicated that alongside duty, structure, and judgment, the universe also allowed room for pleasure, affection, and comfort. Maat, though often less visibly dramatic, may have been the most essential of all. She personified the principle of truth, balance, and rightness that held everything together. In imagery, she wore a simple ostrich feather on her head. In court scenes, her feather was placed on one side of a scale, with a human heart on the other. If the heart balanced with Maat, it meant that the person's life had fit reasonably well into the pattern of order. If not, the imbalance reflected disharmony. Beneath these major gods existed many lesser deities, tied to specific needs or places. Bastet, with the head of a cat, guarded homes and families. She was gentle yet alert, a presence that kept danger at bay. Taweret, with the form of a pregnant hippopotamus, combined with other animal parts, protected women during pregnancy and childbirth. Her heavy, grounded form suggested stability and endurance during vulnerable moments. Sobek, the crocodile god, was honored especially in regions where crocodiles were common. While these animals could be dangerous, Sobek also symbolized the raw strength of the river and the protection of its banks. Khnum, with a ram's head and a potter's wheel, shaped human bodies from clay and crafted their life force. Local gods and goddesses were often deeply woven into the identity of a town, giving each place a unique sacred character. The Egyptians used animal features for their gods, not because they worshipped animals themselves, but because animal traits expressed divine qualities clearly. A falcon's sharp gaze and high flight suited Horus. A lioness's strength suited certain aspects of Hathor and Sekhmet. A cow symbolized nourishment, a cat vigilance, a crocodile power, an ibis thoughtful patience. The combination of human and animal elements allowed artists and worshippers to read the nature of a god at a glance. Over time, the pantheon did not remain rigid. Gods with similar roles or overlapping qualities were joined into composite forms. Amun, originally a local god of hidden air in Thebes, was united with Ra to become Amun-Ra, a creator and sun god whose power was both visible and concealed. In Memphis, Ptah, the creator through thought and word, was joined with Sokar and Osiris in a form that connected creation, burial, and rebirth. These combinations did not erase older ideas, but layered them into a richer picture. Temples dedicated to these deities were built across the land. Each temple was seen as a kind of horizon, a place where the world of the gods touched the world of humans. In the most hidden room, a statue of the god stood on a pedestal. Every morning, priests entered this space, performed purification rites, opened the shrine, washed and clothed the statue, and presented offerings of food, drink, and incense. These rituals were quiet and regular, like the sun's daily path. The gods were not thought to eat in a physical sense. The offerings were later consumed by priests or used for the temple's needs. But the act of presenting them maintained a relationship. Humans cared for the gods, and the gods maintained the universe. If these exchanges stopped, creation could weaken. In this way, even routine temple work became a form of cosmic service, binding people and deities together in a loop of mutual attention. Outside the inner chambers, processions carried the images of gods out among the people on festival days. Sacred boats or barks holding the images were transported along the river or through the streets. For many Egyptians, these occasions were the main opportunities to feel close to the gods. Music, gentle movement, and shared participation created a sense of connection that joined townspeople, farmers, scribes, and craftsmen under the gaze of their patron deities. In private life, small altars and shrines extended this relationship into the home. A family might place a simple figure of Bes near a bed to guard sleep and protect children from bad dreams. A small statue of Taweret could stand near a doorway, silently watching over a pregnant woman in the house. These humble practices mirrored the grand rituals of temples, but in miniature. The same gods who watched over stars and kings were believed to keep an eye on ordinary households. Taken together, the Egyptian pantheon expressed a gentle but complex view of reality. The world was not governed by a single uniform force, but by many cooperating powers, each with a specific domain. Some oversaw the sky and the sun, some the river and the earth, some the boundary between life and death, and some the fragile spaces of birth and illness. By telling stories about these figures and caring for their images, the Egyptians found a way to live within a universe that was varied yet ordered. full of differences yet held together by quiet structure. As you rest and listen, you might picture this pantheon not as a crowded hall of loud voices, but as a wide, calm landscape. In one direction, the sun god moves slowly across the sky. In another, a wrapped figure sits peacefully on a throne of green. A falcon watches from above. A jackal waits by a doorway. A gentle cow steps forward with milk. A scribe notes down the passing of hours. All of them carry out their roles without haste, repeating their patterns day after day, age after age, in a patient, unending rhythm. In the quiet landscape of Egyptian thought, one story unfolded more gently and completely than any other. It was the long tale of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Seth. Unlike sudden heroic battles or dramatic myths, this story moved in slow waves, following cycles of life, loss, protection, and restoration. It carried the rhythm of the Nile itself, rising and falling, pausing and returning, always steady, always patient. The Egyptians saw in it the pattern of existence, expressed through calm divine figures who shaped the world simply by continuing their roles. Osiris was imagined as a king who ruled the earth during a peaceful age. He taught people to plant seeds, harvest crops, and live in harmony with the gentle order that creation required. His guidance was quiet rather than forceful, like the slow growth of plants. In the stories told for centuries, he was a ruler who preferred instruction to command, showing people how to honor the gods, care for the land, and treat each other with fairness. Under his rule, life unfolded with predictability and care. Isis stood beside him as a partner who understood both the spoken and unspoken needs of the world. She guided, healed, and watched attentively. Her presence was subtle but essential. In many depictions, she spread protective wings behind Osiris, as if shielding him and the land he governed. To later generations, Isis represented the power of devoted attention, the kind that notices small details and restores what has been disturbed. She was the embodiment of patient wisdom. Their harmony did not last forever, because the world they lived in contained many forces, not all of them gentle. Seth, Osiris's brother, represented the desert, the harsh winds, and the restless parts of existence. His domain was not the fertile valley, but the empty expanses beyond it. His nature reflected this environment, shifting, unpredictable, sometimes useful, sometimes destructive. While Osiris taught cultivation, Seth embodied wildness and disruption. In the myth, Seth grew resentful of Osiris's steady reign. This resentment did not appear suddenly, but developed slowly, much like the gradual spread of sand over farmland. Eventually, Seth devised a plan to remove Osiris from his position. The tale told of a beautifully decorated chest crafted to match Osiris's exact body. When Osiris lay inside it during a quiet moment of trust, Seth sealed it and cast it into the river. The act was not described with speed or violence in Egyptian tradition. It simply happened, marking a transition from order to disruption. The river carried the chest northward. It drifted in silence, moved by currents and tides, until it reached a distant land where it lodged in the roots of a large tree. Over time, the tree grew around the chest, enclosing it completely. This image of Osiris still and enclosed within a tree that continued to grow reflected the Egyptian understanding of hidden life, where stillness did not mean complete absence, but a shift into another state. Isis, upon learning of Osiris's disappearance, began a long and patient search. Her journey was not a hurried one. It mirrored the slow movement of someone seeking something precious with steady determination. She traveled across the land, asking for clues, following traces, guided not by force, but by devotion. Eventually, she found the chest enclosed within the tree. She brought it back carefully, wanting to restore Osiris and resume their shared harmony. Seth, however, discovered what she had done. In another moment of disruption, he seized Osiris's body and tore it into multiple pieces, scattering them across the land. Unlike later interpretations, Egyptian tradition did not treat this as a dramatic or violent event. Instead, it symbolized fragmentation, the way life can break into parts when balance is lost. The scattered pieces represented the state of the world when order weakens and must be gently restored. Isis once again set out to gather what had been lost. Accompanied by her sister Nephthys, she moved from place to place, collecting each fragment with reverence. Her actions were slow, deliberate, and caring. In every region, she performed rituals, restoring what she found. When all the pieces had been gathered, Isis used her knowledge to reassemble Osiris. With the help of Anubis, who oversaw the process of preservation, Osiris was prepared for a new kind of existence. Osiris did not return to rule among the living. Instead, he entered a quieter realm. He became the lord of the afterlife, presiding over the judgment of souls. His new domain was not a place of fear, but a continuation of the principles he embodied: calm fairness, steady transformation, and balanced renewal. The Egyptians saw this as natural. Life and death were not opposites, but phases within a larger pattern. Osiris had simply moved from one phase to another. Before Osiris departed into this deeper state, Isis conceived a son, Horus. She hid with him in marshes and secluded places, keeping him safe from Seth's restless influence. These hidden landscapes were described not with tension, but with gentle detail. Reeds swayed slowly, water moved in soft ripples, and the air was filled with quiet sounds. Isis nursed and protected Horus, using spells and careful prayers to guard him from illness, danger, and wandering spirits. Horus grew gradually, learning from both Isis and the natural world around him. In many charms and healing texts, the figure of the child Horus appeared as one who had suffered from scorpions, fever, or water accidents, only to recover with divine assistance. These stories reassured Egyptians that recovery and protection were always possible. Horus's childhood became a model for healing rituals meant to support vulnerable children and guide families through delicate moments. Eventually, Horus reached an age where he could present himself before the assembled gods. He sought the throne that had belonged to Osiris, claiming it not through aggression, but through rightful lineage. The gods listened, and the process that followed was described as a long series of judgments, debates, and tests. The conflict between Horus and Seth was not a sudden clash, but a gradual examination of character, identity, and suitability for leadership. In one episode, the two deities transformed into hippopotamuses and submerged themselves in water for days. This was not portrayed as a battle of strength, but as a test of endurance and resilience. In another moment, Seth tried to discredit Horus through clever tricks, which the gods calmly evaluated. Each episode emphasized that legitimacy required patience, fairness, and steady conduct. Isis also appeared during these proceedings. In one story, she intervened on Horus's behalf with a mixture of wisdom and compassion. Seth protested her involvement, seeing it as interference. The dispute revealed the contrast between impulsive force and thoughtful guidance. Isis's presence showed that leadership required more than power. It required connection, empathy, and understanding. After many examinations, the gods agreed that Horus was the rightful heir. He was crowned as king of the living, embodying clarity, vision, and proper order. Seth, though not chosen to rule, was not expelled from the divine community. He retained roles connected with storm winds, deserts, and the protection of the sun god during the night. The Egyptians accepted that disruption could not be removed entirely from existence. It had to be placed within the right boundaries. With Horus crowned, Osiris assumed his position in the afterlife with full recognition. Together, father and son formed a pair that expressed the dual aspects of kingship. The living king was Horus, active in the world, ensuring stability. The deceased king became Osiris, continuing as a quiet, dignified presence in the realm beyond. This pattern repeated with every pharaoh. When a ruler ascended the throne, he became a new Horus. When he died, he joined the lineage of Osiris figures, guiding the unseen world. This cycle helped the Egyptians understand leadership, renewal, and continuity. The story did not emphasize conquest or dramatic victory. Instead, it expressed a gentle truth. Order is restored through patience, cooperation, and respect for established patterns. Even when parts of life fall apart, as Osiris's body did, they can be gathered again, piece by piece, and returned to harmony through attentive care. Every funeral reenacted parts of the Osiris myth. The wrapping of the body reflected the preservation of Osiris. The prayers for protection echoed the spells Isis used. The hope for new life mirrored Osiris's transformation into a god of the afterlife. In this way, the myth became more than a story. It became a structure that supported human experience, guiding families through loss with the assurance that death was not an end, but a passage. Even the marshes where Isis hid with Horus were remembered in ritual and art. Scenes of calm water, floating papyrus, and gently curving reeds represented sanctuary, protection, and renewal. These landscapes appeared in tombs to provide comfort for the dead, echoing the idea that safe refuge could always be found, even in moments of uncertainty. As generations passed, the story of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Seth remained at the core of Egyptian belief. Its slow, patient rhythm matched the cycles of the natural world. It reassured people that order could be restored after disruption, that care could overcome fragmentation, and that renewal followed every decline. In the quiet presence of these gods, the Egyptians found a model for every transition in life. As time passed in Egyptian thought, the story of these gods continued to unfold in the background of daily life. People did not imagine the tale as something fixed in a distant past, but as a cycle that gently repeated itself each time the world moved from one season to another. Osiris's calm presence lingered in the fertile soil, in the quiet stretch of fields waiting for the flood, and in the patient work of farmers tending their crops. His steady influence lived in every slow transformation that supported life. Horus's role also remained active in the world. Each new king, upon taking the throne, renewed the connection between the human realm and the calm stability of the divine pattern. The coronation rituals, with their slow processions and quiet invocations, echoed the long judgment that once decided the rightful heir. In these ceremonies, the king did not become a warrior or conqueror, but a guardian, someone expected to hold the land together with clarity and fairness. Seth's place, too, continued in a balanced way. He was present in the hot winds rising from the desert and in the sudden storms that moved across the sky. These natural forces were not feared as intrusions, but recognized as part of the world's wider structure. Egyptians understood that difficult elements could be contained, guided, and woven into the greater harmony if approached with respect and awareness. Isis, throughout all of this, remained a symbol of devoted care. Her search for Osiris, her protection of Horus, and her deep patience became models for how people might handle loss or uncertainty. When families performed quiet rituals for their ancestors, they often felt guided by the memory of Isis, gathering the scattered pieces of what she loved. Her presence suggested that even when life felt fragmented, attention and tenderness could slowly restore coherence. Together, these gods shaped a long, unhurried story that accompanied the Egyptians through generations. The myth did not demand quick resolutions or dramatic endings. Instead, it offered a steady reminder that order could return after disruption, and that each part of existence, whether peaceful or challenging, had a place in the calm, cyclical movement of the world. Each night in Egyptian thought, the sun slipped below the western horizon and began a long and quiet journey through the unseen world. The Egyptians imagined this passage not as a dramatic descent, but as a calm movement into softer light. The sun entered the hidden realm with the same regularity that guided all of nature. Its path through the night expressed the steady cycle of disappearance and return, rest and renewal, decline and rebirth. The solar god traveled across the sky by day, but at dusk he shifted into another state. His form changed to match the landscape he entered. In the deepest hours, he appeared as an older presence, sometimes called Atum, preparing for the silent passage ahead. The Egyptians saw the western horizon as a kind of threshold, a gentle doorway through which the sun stepped into a realm that was not fully dark, but filled with muted colors and slow-flowing paths. This region was known as the Duat. It was not a place of torment, but a landscape of stillness and layered passages. The Duat was described as a sequence of rooms, rivers, caverns, mounds, and gateways. Each section had its own calm guardians, its own rhythms, and its own symbols. The solar god was not alone in this space. Other deities, spirits, and protective figures accompanied him, ensuring that his journey remained smooth and uninterrupted. The Egyptians divided the night into 12 equal hours, each with its own quiet setting. These hours appeared in funerary texts such as the Amduat, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Caverns. These writings traced the sun's movement through the night, showing how each hour contributed to the maintenance of cosmic order. The sun god's progress was slow, steady, and purposeful, never rushed, always following the same established pattern. In the first hour, the sun entered the western horizon and was greeted by deities who recognized his arrival. Their presence signaled that the passage had begun properly. They welcomed him with ceremonial calm, acknowledging his role as the source of life for the daytime world. Torches, gentle waves, and soft chants accompanied the scene, setting a tone of respectful transition. As the solar boat moved deeper into the Duat, the scenery shifted gradually. In some hours, the god traveled along a river lined with subtle forms. In others, he passed through enclosed spaces, watched by guardians who ensured that only the proper beings could proceed. These guardians did not threaten the sun. They protected the order of the journey, keeping the path clear and stable. One of the most significant figures accompanying the sun was Seth. Despite his reputation as a disruptive force in other myths, he played a vital protective role here. In this quiet, dangerous realm, Seth stood at the prow of the solar bark, using his strength to guard the god from forces that sought to interfere with the sun's renewal. His presence illustrated the Egyptian belief that even challenging elements could serve the preservation of order under the right circumstances. Among the beings encountered in the Duat, one stood out for its persistence. Apophis, a great serpent representing the possibility of dissolution. This serpent did not act with noisy aggression. Instead, it embodied stillness without renewal, a kind of stagnation that threatened the orderly cycle. Each night, Apophis attempted to hinder the solar boat, coiling around pathways or stretching across the river. But he never succeeded. Priests, deities, and ritual texts held him in check, cutting his presence into harmless fragments that dissolved by dawn. The repeated overcoming of Apophis was not imagined as a violent battle. It was more like the daily work of clearing a canal or maintaining a garden. The world required regular care, and the sun's attendants provided it. Through patience and ritual, they kept the path open. Apophis returned each night, but so did the forces that restrained him. This balance reflected the Egyptians' understanding of existence. Order was not permanent, but it could be preserved through steady attention. As the night continued, the solar god passed through regions associated with the dead. These areas were silent and filled with still forms resting in darkness. The sun did not disturb them. Instead, his presence provided warmth and gentle movement. In some texts, the sun god revived these spirits with a quiet glow, helping them rise or breathe again. This renewal was not dramatic. It took place gradually, hour by hour, as the god's light brushed over the shapes of the departed. In the middle hours of the night, the solar god encountered Osiris. This meeting was essential for renewal. Osiris represented stillness transformed into new form. During their encounter, the sun god and Osiris merged briefly, sharing power in a moment described as both quiet and restorative. This union ensured that the sun would regain strength and rise again, just as Osiris continued to preside over the dead with calm authority. After the meeting with Osiris, the solar god began to regain youthfulness. His form shifted once more. He appeared not as an old presence, but as a younger deity preparing to rise. The Egyptians described this stage as a moment of regeneration, when the sun gathered the energy needed to return. This transformation did not happen suddenly, but unfolded over several hours, like the slow brightening of the horizon before dawn. As the last hours of the night approached, the solar boat passed through more open spaces. The darkness softened, and the boundary between night and day became thinner. The guardians of these final gates stood ready to open the way for the returning light. They recognized that the cycle was nearing completion. The solar god, having completed his rejuvenation, was ready to step once more into the visible world. In the 12th hour, the eastern horizon glowed with faint color. The solar boat approached the final gate. Behind it lay the long path through the night. Ahead lay the return to the sky. When the gate opened, the sun emerged in the form of Khepri, the young morning light. The world brightened gently, and the cycle began again. For the Egyptians, this nightly journey explained the rhythm of days, seasons, and years. It showed that even when something seemed to disappear, it continued its path in hidden realms. The sun's renewal was not a miracle, but a natural pattern, supported by cooperation, guardianship, and continuity. In this calm movement, the Egyptians found reassurance that order prevailed even during darkness. The journey through the Duat also served as a model for the deceased. Just as the sun transitioned from day to night and back again, so too could humans move through the quiet spaces of the afterlife and return to light in new forms. The texts that described the sun's path became guides for the dead, offering protection, orientation, and gentle reminders of recurring cycles. The rivers, gates, and chambers of the duat were imagined not as terrifying obstacles, but as thresholds to be crossed with the right knowledge. Each doorway marked a slow transition from one state to another. The dead were believed to follow similar routes, carried by the wisdom contained in funerary spells. These passages mirrored the cosmic journey, providing a map that linked human existence with the sun's eternal movement. As dawn approached each day in Egypt, the sky brightened in soft gradients. The return of the sun after its journey reassured everyone that the pattern continued. Farmers saw the fields illuminated again. Boats resumed their movement on the river. People greeted the day with the understanding that light had returned because the sun had been renewed. This slow, dependable rhythm shaped their view of time, linking cosmic motion with everyday life. The solar journey also reinforced the idea that darkness was not an enemy, but a necessary stage. It allowed the sun to rest, transform, and return stronger. This perspective shaped Egyptian thinking about all cycles, seasons, lifetimes, and the long stretches of history. Decline did not signify ending. It marked a quiet phase that led toward renewal. In temples, priests recited portions of these nighttime texts during rituals. They imagined themselves assisting the sun in its travels, supporting the cosmic maintenance that kept the world balanced. Their words were gentle and measured, meant to echo the slow passage of the solar boat. Through these recitations, human voices joined the silent journey, linking earthly actions with the cosmic cycle. The voyage of the sun through the duat remained a central theme across many centuries. It reassured people that every descent had a corresponding ascent, every quiet moment a renewal, every unseen space a purpose. The sun's patience in returning again and again formed a calm foundation for Egyptian thought. It shaped their views on life, death, order, movement, and the gentle certainty of recurring light. In the Egyptian understanding of the universe, everything rested upon a principle so gentle and steady that it did not need force to sustain itself. This principle was called Mat. It described balance, truth, harmony, and the right functioning of all things. Mat was not a rigid notion, but a flexible, living pattern that allowed the world to continue moving in a calm and predictable rhythm. The Egyptians imagined Mat as both a goddess and an idea. As a goddess, she appeared as a woman wearing a single feather on her head. As an idea, she expressed the quiet logic that shaped the universe, the way rivers followed their paths, seasons cycled, and people interacted with one another. Mat was present when everything worked as it should, when actions were considerate, and when natural forces remained in balance. From the beginning of creation, Mat was established as the foundation upon which the ordered world rested. The gods themselves relied on her. Even Ra, who traversed the sky each day, maintained his path because Mat supported the cycle. Without this underlying order, the sun might not rise, the river might not flood, and the subtle cooperation among gods and humans could weaken. Maat made the universe stable yet alive. In daily life, Maat guided social behavior. Egyptians believed that living in accordance with Maat meant treating others with fairness, speaking truthfully, and honoring responsibilities. This was not heroic morality, but simple steadiness. A person who practiced Maat contributed to the greater harmony, just as a well-tended field contributed to the nourishment of a family. The emphasis was on maintaining balance rather than pursuing perfection. The pharaoh held a special role in this framework. As the living Horus, he was expected to uphold Maat on behalf of the entire society. His duties were not limited to administration. They included performing rituals, offering gifts to the gods, and ensuring that justice was carried out peacefully. When the pharaoh acted in harmony with Maat, the land prospered. When he strayed, disorder could creep into human affairs and natural cycles. Texts from the Egyptian wisdom tradition encouraged individuals to adopt Maat in their own conduct. These writings, often attributed to officials or scholars, advised patience, modesty, careful speech, and respect for elders and ancestors. They described Maat not as something imposed from above, but as an internal compass that guided quiet, thoughtful choices. The goal was to align personal life with the wider order of the world. This emphasis on balance appeared in all levels of society. Even small interactions, such as buying goods, sharing water, or resolving disputes, were expected to follow Maat. Scribes recorded these concerns in simple terms: avoid harming others, keep promises, speak with clarity, and refrain from unnecessary conflict. Harmony depended on countless small gestures repeated each day. In the cosmic realm, Maat played a similar but larger role. She ensured that the movements of stars, the behavior of winds, and the growth of crops followed their proper patterns. When Egyptians watched the sunrise, they saw not only light, but the confirmation that Maat still held. When the Nile rose predictably, they saw further signs of her presence. These natural events were not taken for granted. They were pieces of a larger, delicate structure, maintained through divine and human cooperation. The opposite of Maat was not evil in a modern sense, but disorder, called Isfet. Isfet represented confusion, imbalance, and the breakdown of relationships. It appeared when people acted selfishly, when storms scattered the desert sands, or when illness disrupted the body's harmony. The Egyptians understood Isfet as an ever-present possibility, something that could arise naturally but needed constant attention to prevent it from spreading. The daily rituals performed in temples were meant to strengthen Maat. Priests cleaned the statues, offered incense, and recited carefully chosen words to refresh the connection between humans and gods. These actions were not dramatic. They were quiet, repetitive, and precise, mirroring the slow, steady nature of Maat itself. Each offering was a reminder that balance required cultivation. One of the clearest expressions of Maat appeared in the descriptions of the afterlife. When a person died, their heart was weighed on a scale against Maat's feather. The heart symbolized the person's life, containing their actions, choices, and thoughts. If the heart balanced with the feather, it meant the person had lived in general alignment with Maat. They could continue into the next realm peacefully. If the heart weighed heavier than the feather, it indicated that disorder had accumulated. The soul would not continue into the realm of harmony, but would instead dissolve into stillness, returning to a state without movement. This outcome was not described with fear. Instead, it reflected the natural consequence of imbalance. Much like a field left uncultivated, eventually losing its fertility. For those who passed the weighing, the afterlife offered a calm continuation of existence. They could join Osiris, working in fields, reminiscent of the Nile's fertile lands. These fields were known as the Field of Reeds, a place where crops grew tall, water ran clear, and the cycle of day and night continued with gentle regularity. It was a world in which Maat prevailed completely, without interruptions from disorder. The idea of the weighing of the heart encouraged Egyptians to live with awareness. It did not demand impossible righteousness. Instead, it asked for consistent consideration, the kind that keeps relationships clear and duties fulfilled. The focus was not on punishment, but on maintaining personal and cosmic harmony. A person who lived with Maat helped ensure that the world around them remained steady. Maat's influence extended to architecture and craftsmanship as well. The proportions of temples, the layout of tombs, and the orientation of structures toward celestial events all reflected careful thinking about balance. Even small objects, such as amulets, were crafted with attention to symmetry and clarity. These designs were physical forms of Maat, offering stability through their harmonious shapes. In the legal sphere, Maat guided decision-making. Judges and officials swore to uphold her principles, resolving disputes with fairness and calm. Records show that Egyptians valued truthful speech highly and considered falsehood a disruption not only to individuals, but to the cosmic order. By speaking honestly, they believed they were contributing to the larger harmony of existence. Maat also shaped how Egyptians saw the flow of time. They did not imagine history as a line moving forward into unknown territory. Instead, they viewed it as a cycle supported by regularity. When rulers performed duties properly and rituals remained intact, the world stayed in balance. When disruptions occurred, restoration required returning to established patterns, not inventing new ones. Maat anchored this cyclical understanding of past, present, and future. In mythic scenes, Maat often appeared near Ra as he traveled across the sky. She accompanied him in the solar boat, symbolizing the correctness of his path. Her presence ensured that the sun's journey remained steady, that day followed night, and that the pattern held. Without her feather-light balance, the rhythm of time could falter. Her companionship offered reassurance that the world remained anchored in harmony. The ancient Egyptians did not imagine Maat as something abstract or unreachable. Instead, They saw her reflected in the most ordinary parts of life. When a merchant used fair weights, when neighbors shared resources, when families honored their ancestors, when farmers tended crops according to the seasons, they practiced Mayat. She was neither distant nor stern. She was present wherever people acted with care. Even the smallest gestures carried meaning. A kind word, a patient response, a measured decision. These acts supported Maat in ways that echoed the steady movements of the sun and stars. In this understanding, cosmic maintenance was not limited to the gods or the king. It was a shared responsibility woven gently through human behavior. In periods of political or environmental difficulty, Egyptians looked to Maat as a stabilizing force. Hymns and inscriptions praised rulers who restored order after times of disruption. These restorations were not seen as dramatic achievements, but as quiet realignments with the proper pattern. The goal was always to return to the balanced state in which all things could flourish. Over centuries, the concept of Maat remained remarkably consistent. It adapted to new eras and new rulers without losing its essential meaning. The reason for this endurance was simple. Maat was rooted in observable patterns of nature and community. It described the way the world worked when everything was in harmony. As long as people watched the sunrise, tended the fields, and lived together, Maat continued to hold relevance. For the Egyptians, Maat was the soft center of existence, the principle that made life understandable and predictable. She ensured that seasons returned, that crops grew, and that relationships could be repaired. Her feather symbolized the perfect balance between weight and lightness, responsibility and ease. To live with Maat was to live in rhythm with the world itself. In ancient Egypt, the transition between life and death was understood as a gentle passage rather than a final end. People believed that existence continued beyond the body, following a measured progression guided by familiar patterns. The afterlife was not considered distant or abstract. It was described with calm detail, resembling a landscape shaped by memory, tradition, and the slow movement of natural cycles. To understand this extended journey, the Egyptians developed a careful model of the human being. They saw a person not as a single unified entity, but as a composition of different elements, each contributing to the fullness of life. These components worked together during earthly existence, and each one required its own form of preparation for the transition into the next realm. The physical body served as the anchor. It was the place where the other elements gathered, where nourishment was received, and where individuality took shape. For Egyptians, the body did not simply house the soul. It was essential for continuity. Without its preservation, the other components would lose their resting point, drifting without purpose. This belief inspired the careful development of mummification, a practice intended to maintain the body's form gently. Alongside the body was the Ka, the life force that defined vitality. The Ka was believed to enter a person at birth, remaining with them until death. It needed food and drink even after life ended, which explained the offerings arranged carefully in tombs. Inscriptions often included formulas stating that the Ka would receive bread, water, and fragrant oils for eternity. These provisions were not symbolic. They were considered real sustenance at the spiritual level. Another essential part was the Ba, the aspect often depicted as a bird with a human face. The Ba represented personality and movement. It could travel freely, leaving the tomb by day and returning at night. Through the Ba, the deceased maintained connections with the world of the living, visiting familiar places or seeking the company of loved ones. This gentle mobility ensured that the transition to the next realm did not feel abrupt or isolating. When the Ka and Ba were reunited after death, they could combine to form the Ak, the luminous, effective spirit. The Ak was the state of complete transformation, the goal toward which all funerary preparation moved. In this condition, the individual existed peacefully among the gods, participating in the delicate rhythms of the afterlife. The Ak was not a new identity, but a refined continuation of the one formed during life. Besides these elements, Egyptians also considered the Ren, or name, to be inseparable from personal existence. A person remained present as long as their name was remembered and spoken. For this reason, tomb inscriptions carefully preserved names in clear hieroglyphs. The act of speaking a name aloud was believed to refresh and sustain the deceased. To lose one's name was to fade from existence. Another aspect was the shadow, known as the Shiut. It represented quiet presence and subtle influence. The shadow was seen as a silent companion, always connected to the person. In the afterlife, it continued to exist as a protective extension, moving gently through the unseen spaces of the spiritual world. Together, these components created a comprehensive view of the human being. Death did not dissolve these parts, but rearranged their relationships. The smooth functioning of each element determined the quality of the journey beyond life. This understanding shaped the entire structure of funerary practices. The preparation for the afterlife began even before death. Objects chosen for tombs held specific meaning. Furniture, tools, clothing, cosmetics, and writing materials were arranged carefully to reflect the continuation of familiar routines. The Egyptians imagined that comfort, order, and daily patterns would flow naturally into the next realm. The tomb was designed as a home, not a place of final stillness. At the moment of death, a delicate transition took place. The Ba lifted from the body, observing the world from a gentle distance. The Ka remained close, waiting for nourishment. Priests and family members performed rituals to ease this moment, offering words that guided the deceased toward clarity and calm. Soon after, the journey through the afterlife began. This journey moved through the underworld, a quiet realm shaped by winding paths, protective guardians, and softly illuminated chambers. The underworld was not imagined as frightening, but as a landscape requiring awareness. The deceased progressed through gates, each one associated with specific names and gentle instructions. Knowing these names allowed the traveler to proceed without difficulty. To assist the deceased in this navigation, funerary texts were included in tombs. These writings formed a peaceful guide describing locations, beings, and necessary phrases. Some texts were carved onto walls, while others were written on papyrus scrolls placed near the mummy. They served as companions, not warnings, offering reassurance that each stage could be approached with calm preparation. One of the earliest funerary texts was the collection known as the pyramid texts. These inscriptions appeared on the walls of Old Kingdom royal tombs. They described ascension into the celestial realm, guiding the king toward the stars that never set. These stars represented stability and continuity, qualities that reflected the eternal nature of the afterlife. During the Middle Kingdom, funerary preparation widened to include non-royal individuals. The coffin texts developed from this change. These writings adapted earlier royal concepts for everyday people, explaining how the deceased could move safely through the underworld. Many spells focused on transformation, showing how one could become a bird, a lotus, or a gentle flame when needed. Later, in the New Kingdom, a more comprehensive guide emerged, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, often called the Book of the Dead. This collection provided detailed instructions for addressing challenges, greeting guardians, and affirming one's alignment with divine order. The text emphasized clarity and gentle confidence. Nothing rushed, nothing threatened. Each spell moved in steady progression, matching the slow rhythm of the afterlife. Among the most important moments in the journey was the weighing of the heart. The ceremony took place in the Hall of Two Truths. The deceased stood before Osiris, while Anubis attended the scale. On one side of the scale lay the heart. On the other side rested Mot's feather. The balance between them reflected the person's life. If the heart balanced with the feather, the journey could continue. The deceased would move forward with ease, joining the peaceful fields where existence unfolded in calm cycles. If the heart weighed heavier, it indicated that disorder had gathered during life. In that case, the journey ended. The heart would be dissolved, returning the individual to stillness. This outcome was described without fear. It was understood as a natural conclusion when harmony had not been maintained. For those who passed the weighing, the afterlife opened its gentle spaces. The field of reeds stretched wide, resembling the familiar banks of the Nile. Crops grew tall and steady. Water moved slowly. People worked and rested as they had in life, following quiet routines that brought comfort and continuity. This realm was a perfected version of the world they had left behind. In addition to the field of reeds, some joined the sun god on his nightly journey. They accompanied the solar bark through the underworld, rising with Ra at dawn. This was considered a profound honor, as their existence became intertwined with the daily renewal of light. Others visited the earthly realm by day, observing familiar landscapes before returning to the tomb at night. The afterlife offered multiple forms of peaceful presence. To ensure that this transition unfolded smoothly, mummification was performed with great care. The process began by preparing the body, removing internal organs, and placing them in protective containers. These containers, known as canopic jars, were each associated with one of the sons of Horus. Their purpose was to guard the organs so that they could be reunited with the body later. The body itself was dried using natron, then wrapped with layers of linen. Between the layers, amulets were placed to provide protection. These amulets carried symbols of stability, regeneration, and safe passage. Each layer of wrapping was a gesture of patience, performed slowly and deliberately. The goal was not transformation of the body's appearance, but preservation of its shape. At the end of this process, priests performed the opening of the mouth ceremony. This ritual restored the senses of the deceased, allowing them to see, speak, breathe, and receive offerings. It symbolized the reactivation of the body's connection to the spiritual components. Through this ceremony, the tomb became a place where all parts of the individual could gather. Once the tomb was sealed, family members continued to nurture the deceased. Offerings of bread, water, and incense were brought regularly. Names were spoken aloud to sustain the wren. Stories were told to preserve memory. These acts formed a bridge between the living and the dead, creating a community that extended beyond the boundaries of physical life. Over time, the complexity of afterlife beliefs grew, but the tone remained steady. Egyptians described every stage with clarity and calmness. They believed that the journey continued with familiar patterns: work, rest, nourishment, companionship, and the steady movement of light and darkness. Nothing abrupt, nothing chaotic. Existence unfolded gently, reflecting the same rhythms seen in the natural world. The structure of the human being provided reassurance that nothing essential was lost at death. Each component simply shifted into a new form of activity. The Ka received offerings. The Ba traveled softly. The Ak radiated. The Ren remained present through spoken memory. The shadow moved quietly. The body served as a resting place. Together, these elements created a complete picture of existence that extended naturally from earthly life into the afterlife. This understanding enabled Egyptians to approach death without fear. Their focus was on continuity and preparation, not endings. Tombs became spaces of comfort. Rituals became acts of care. Words spoken during funerary rites were intended to soothe, guide, and assure a peaceful transition. The afterlife was a landscape already known, shaped by the patterns of daily life. In this worldview, the human journey was not linear. It moved in cycles, reflecting the rise and fall of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, and the turning of seasons. Death was simply another stage in this progression. For those who lived in harmony with Maat, the transition brought renewal. For those who did not, the journey rested in stillness. In either case, the universe maintained its quiet balance. Over centuries, the details of funerary practices changed. Texts evolved, rituals expanded, and tombs varied in design. Yet the core understanding remained stable. Life continued beyond the visible world. Each component of the self contributed to this continuation, and the afterlife offered a place where existence could unfold calmly, free from haste and disorder. Through this gentle vision, the Egyptians created one of history's most enduring perspectives on death. Their approach reflected a deep appreciation for the slow, steady patterns of nature and the belief that these patterns extended beyond the boundary of life. It was a worldview shaped by patience, observation, and an unwavering trust in the rhythm of renewal. In the Egyptian understanding of the world, kingship was not simply a political position. It was a quiet bridge between humans and the divine, woven into the structure of the cosmos as naturally as the rising sun. The pharaoh stood at the center of this arrangement, not through force or authority, but through a steady presence that maintained the balance of all things. The Egyptians believed that before humans ruled the land, the gods themselves had governed directly. These early ages were described as peaceful and perfectly ordered. The patterns established during that time became the model for every later king. Each pharaoh stepped into a role shaped long before his birth, continuing a rhythm that stretched across generations. When a new ruler came to the throne, he did not begin as an ordinary individual. Rituals transformed him, aligning him with the divine essence of kingship. The coronation was gentle but profound. Through careful words and symbolic gestures, the king became associated with Horus, the falcon god who embodied rightful rule. The living king was Horus in human form, while his predecessor, now deceased, was identified with Osiris. This created a continuous cycle, one king rising, another completing his journey, both contributing to the stability of the world. The titles given to the pharaoh reflected this connection. Each title carried layers of meaning. One affirmed his identity as Horus. Another connected him to the protective goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt. Others linked him to Ra, reinforcing the idea that his rule followed the same dependable rhythm as the sun's path across the sky. These titles were not ornamental. They formed a clear framework describing the king's responsibilities and his place within the cosmic order. The pharaoh's duties extended far beyond governance. He was expected to maintain harmony between the human realm and the divine. This required performing rituals in the temples, offering incense, and speaking words of renewal. Although priests carried out many of these tasks, they always acted on behalf of the king. Each offering was understood as the pharaoh's gesture, reaffirming the relationship between the gods and the land. The king also upheld Mat, the principle of balance and truthful order. When he judged a dispute, issued a decree, or oversaw construction, he was expected to act in harmony with Ma'at. Egyptians believed that the land prospered when the king maintained this alignment. Crops grew steadily, the Nile flooded predictably, and communities lived peacefully. When disruptions occurred, people looked to the pharaoh for restoration, trusting that his role was central to rebalancing the world. Monuments reinforced this understanding. Temples, statues, and reliefs depicted the king offering small figures of Ma'at to the gods. This image symbolized his responsibility. He did not give wealth, force, or authority, but order itself. The gesture revealed the essence of kingship as a quiet service that supported the stability of the cosmos. In daily governance, the pharaoh relied on officials and administrators, yet their authority flowed from his divine role. They carried out tasks related to agriculture, taxation, justice, and construction, always with the understanding that they participated in the maintenance of cosmic balance. Their work, though practical, remained rooted in the same steady principles that guided temple rituals and religious observances. The king's relationship with the gods was expressed in many forms of art. Reliefs showed him receiving life from deities, symbolized by the Ankh. Others depicted him embraced by protective gods, reaffirming that he was not merely a ruler, but a participant in the divine world. These images were not intended to impress or intimidate. They served to remind viewers that kingship was woven gently into the order of existence. One of the most meaningful aspects of divine kingship came from its continuity. When a king died, the transition to the next ruler followed ancient patterns. Funerary rituals honored the deceased king as Osiris, ensuring his peaceful entry into the afterlife. At the same time, the new king affirmed his role as Horus, renewing the cycle. This dual movement, one completing his journey, the other rising to begin his, mirrored the natural patterns of sunrise and sunset, decline and renewal. The king's divine nature did not place him beyond human expectations. Wisdom texts offered him practical guidance about fairness, patience, and humility. These texts encouraged moderation, emphasizing that gentle steadiness was more effective than harshness. In this way, kingship remained anchored in the same values that shaped ordinary life, linking the daily concerns of the people to the broader cosmic order. Throughout Egyptian history, divine kingship adapted to changing circumstances. In times of stability, the role remained consistent, expressed through rituals and quiet administration. During moments of political difficulty, the image of the king as restorer of order became especially important. Texts praised rulers who reestablished harmony after periods of disruption, describing them as bringing the land back into balance. Even foreign rulers who came to control Egypt found it necessary to adopt the framework of divine kingship. They appeared in traditional regalia, performed temple rituals, and aligned themselves with the responsibilities expected of pharaohs. This reflected the strength of the concept. Kingship was not simply a political position tied to ethnicity or origin. It was a cosmic role that required participation in the long-standing patterns of Egyptian belief. One striking feature of Egyptian kingship was its connection to the temple. Temples were not primarily places for public worship, but homes for the gods. Within these spaces, the king renewed creation through careful rituals. The daily opening of the shrine, the offering of food and incense, and the recitation of quiet prayers were all understood as actions that refreshed the bond between humanity and the divine. Each ritual reflected the belief that order required constant attention. Architecture supported these ideas. Temples were built along precise axes, aligning with celestial events and natural cycles. Their courtyards, halls, and sanctuaries guided visitors through increasing levels of quiet and stillness, culminating in the innermost chamber where the god statue rested. The king's presence in this chamber symbolized his role as mediator, bringing human devotion into the divine space. Another important aspect of divine kingship was the concept of the royal ka. Unlike the personal ka that every individual possessed, the royal ka represented the enduring essence of kingship itself. Each new ruler inherited this ka, linking him to the long line of previous kings. This continuity ensured that kingship remained stable even as individual rulers passed through their earthly lives. Through festivals, the king also participated in renewing seasonal cycles. During the Apet festival at Thebes, statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu traveled from Karnak to Luxor, accompanied by the king. The procession symbolized the rejuvenation of royal power and the strengthening of the bond between the king and the divine. These events unfolded at a slow, measured pace, reinforcing the calm rhythms that shaped the Egyptian worldview. In some periods, artistic styles emphasized the king's connection to the gods through idealized forms. Statues depicted him with youthful features, serene expressions, and balanced proportions. These images did not aim to resemble the actual appearance of the king. Instead, they represented his timeless nature as a participant in the divine order. At other times, such as during the reign of Akhenaten, kingship took on new forms. Akhenaten shifted emphasis toward the Aten, the visible sun disk, and presented himself in a style that blended human features with divine symbolism. While this period introduced significant changes, the underlying principle remained. The king maintained harmony through his connection with the divine. After Akhenaten's death, traditional patterns were restored. Temples regained their earlier forms, rituals resumed their established rhythms, and kingship returned to its steady balance. This restoration demonstrated how deeply rooted divine kingship was in Egyptian thought. Even during moments of innovation, the core understanding remained intact. Over time, the practical role of the king changed as Egypt encountered foreign powers and shifting political landscapes. Yet the symbolic role persisted. Later, Egyptian rulers, Greek leaders, and Roman emperors all adopted aspects of divine kingship when presenting themselves to the Egyptian people. they understood that to govern effectively within this cultural framework, they needed to participate in its ancient rhythms. For ordinary Egyptians, the pharaoh remained a steady figure who connected their daily concerns with the broader patterns of the universe. Farmers looked to him to ensure the Nile's cycles remained stable. Craftspeople saw him as the source of inspiration for ordered work. Priests understood him as the central participant in rituals that sustained their world. Through this system, kingship shaped Egyptian civilization not as an external authority, but as part of the natural order. It offered a sense of continuity across centuries, grounding each generation in the same quiet rhythm. The king's presence became a symbol of alignment, a reminder that human life could harmonize with divine patterns when guided with steady care. As centuries passed, the role of the pharaoh evolved, yet its significance remained. Whether portrayed in idealized stone, participating in processions, or appearing in temple reliefs, the king embodied the calm balance that allowed life to unfold predictably. Through him, the Egyptians expressed their belief that existence relied on cooperation between the human and the divine, maintained through steady rituals and consistent alignment with Maat. This vision of kingship did not demand grandeur or dramatic displays. It emphasized presence, duty, and harmony. The pharaoh's greatest contribution was the assurance that order would continue, that the sun would rise, and that the cycles of life would remain intact. In this way, divine kingship became one of the most enduring expressions of the Egyptian worldview, shaping their understanding of leadership, community, and the nature of existence. In the Egyptian conception of the cosmos, not every being fit comfortably among the gods or within the human world. Some existed in a quiet space between categories, shaped by unusual forms and subtle influences. These beings were neither entirely benevolent nor wholly dangerous. Instead, they represented natural forces that required understanding and careful attention. Their presence added depth to the peaceful structure of the universe, reminding people that balance involved acknowledging all aspects of existence. Among the most well-known of these figures was the great serpent, who opposed the sun god during the night. This serpent did not symbolize evil in a modern sense, but the possibility of disorder. Its presence in the underworld reflected the quiet tension between stability and the natural tendency toward dissolution. Each night, as the sun traveled through the hidden realm, this serpent attempted to interrupt the journey. The sun continued nevertheless, supported by companions who maintained the calm rhythm of cosmic order. The Egyptians understood this nightly encounter not as a dramatic battle, but as a recurring moment within the larger cycle of time. Disorder could never be removed entirely. It reappeared gently, as darkness does at the end of each day. By acknowledging this pattern, the Egyptians cultivated a patient perspective. They recognized that order required continual care, yet they trusted the steady renewal that followed. Another being who held an important place in Egyptian thought was the devourer who waited in the hall of judgment. This creature, formed from the features of several powerful animals, ensured that only those aligned with truth could continue into the afterlife. Her presence was not intended to inspire fear. Instead, she represented a natural boundary. If the heart carried too much weight from imbalance, the journey simply came to rest. In this way, she served as a quiet guardian of harmony. Some creatures accompanied the gods during moments of transition. The scorpions associated with the goddess Isis offered protection during her movements through the marshlands. Although their appearance could seem intimidating, their role was steady and purposeful. They guarded the vulnerable without seeking conflict, reflecting the principle that even beings with dangerous qualities could contribute to balance when guided by intention. Other beings reflected aspects of nature familiar to Egyptians. The bone eater, known in certain texts, represented the natural process of decay. His presence in funerary literature acknowledged that the body, even when carefully preserved, remained part of a larger pattern. Rituals and spells did not deny this process, but ensured that it occurred gently, allowing the spiritual components of the person to continue their journey. The Egyptian world also included quiet protectors who guarded households rather than temples. One such figure appeared with a rounded body, a broad face, and short limbs. Though striking in appearance, he served as a gentle guardian of homes. Families believed he watched over children, supported mothers, and repelled unseen forces during the night. His image appeared on furniture, headrests, and amulets, offering a sense of comfort and continuity. Another protective presence took the form of a standing hippopotamus goddess associated with childbirth and safety. Her strong posture and attentive gaze conveyed assurance rather than aggression. She protected the vulnerable in moments of transition, reflecting the Egyptian belief that strength could exist quietly, without conflict or force. Certain beings served as symbolic guides. The bird associated with renewal, often described with long legs and graceful wings, represented gentle cycles of rebirth. This bird was linked to the rising sun and to the patient unfolding of new beginnings. Its presence suggested that transformation occurred naturally over time, not through abrupt changes, but through steady growth. Among the beings connected to the protection of the deceased were the 4 sons of Horus. Each one guarded a particular organ preserved in its own container. Together, they ensured that the body remained complete for its eventual reunion with the spiritual elements. Their forms, human, baboon, jackal, and falcon, symbolized different aspects of guidance and vigilance. Their roles reflected the Egyptian desire to maintain harmony across multiple levels of existence. Some extraordinary beings inhabited the primeval waters associated with creation. These beings, often depicted with animal heads and human bodies, represented the earliest conditions before the world took shape. They embodied darkness, vast waters, invisibility, and endless time. Though they seemed distant from human life, they were essential to the cosmic structure. Their presence acknowledged that creation emerged from a state both deep and mysterious, a state requiring careful respect. In magical texts, other beings existed to assist or challenge travelers in the afterlife. They guarded gates, managed sacred borders, and maintained order in hidden places. Their roles were not malicious. They simply ensured that travelers moved with awareness. To pass these guardians, one needed to speak their names or understand their nature. This gentle requirement encouraged clarity of mind, even in the afterlife. Some beings appeared in stories not as characters, but as symbolic reminders. A wandering presence could represent loneliness, unresolved duties, or the need for remembrance. These figures demonstrated the Egyptians' subtle understanding of human emotions, acknowledging that certain experiences continued beyond physical life. Through rituals and offerings, families provided comfort to these wandering presences, restoring their place within the larger harmony. The Egyptians also described times of increased vulnerability when certain forces grew more active. The days at the end of the year, added to complete the calendar, were considered moments when the boundary between order and disorder thinned slightly. People took simple precautions, using amulets or quiet rituals to maintain balance. These precautions were not signs of fear, but reminders of the cyclical nature of existence. Certain magical practices referenced beings shaped from wax or clay. These small figures served as symbolic substitutes, carrying prayers or absorbing illness. Through gentle rituals, practitioners guided these figures toward dissolution, releasing tension or difficulty. These practices reflected the Egyptian belief that symbolic action could influence subtle forces, helping restore calm. In stories preserved on temple walls, some beings accompanied the sun god during his nightly journey. They pulled the solar boat through the quiet waters, protected its passage, or guided it around hidden obstacles. Their roles were steady and repetitive, mirroring the unchanging rhythm of the sun's movement. They represented loyalty, routine, and the patient maintenance of cosmic order. Other beings watched over sacred places, especially those connected to the horizon or the desert's edge. Some resembled lions, their bodies representing strength and protection. They guarded thresholds, ensuring that transitions between realms occurred peacefully. These guardians stood as reminders that movement required awareness, whether one crossed from day to night or from life to the afterlife. Certain beings played roles in myths involving transformation. They shifted shapes to reflect the fluid nature of the universe. Through these stories, Egyptians expressed the idea that identity could expand or contract depending on circumstances. These transformations were not dramatic. They unfolded smoothly, like the slow growth of a plant or the quiet change of light across the sky. In funerary literature, beings with gentle voices appeared, offering guidance during the afterlife journey. They spoke softly, reminding the deceased of familiar paths and reassuring them at each stage. Their presence reflected the Egyptian understanding of the afterlife as a place where companionship and support continued, easing the transition between realms. In some texts, beings associated with illness or misfortune appeared. These figures represented the natural unpredictability of life. Rituals addressed these forces, calming them or redirecting them. The Egyptians believed that misfortune did not arise from malice, but from imbalance. Their approach to such forces focused on restoration rather than confrontation. The supernatural world also included collective groups of beings who maintained cosmic functions. Some groups regulated the flow of water, others oversaw wind or light. Their roles were repetitive and dependable, reinforcing the idea that the universe required ongoing care from many different presences. These groups worked quietly, unseen by humans, yet essential for harmony. The Egyptians did not view extraordinary beings as entirely separate from daily life. Their images appeared on amulets, household objects, and small shrines. Families carried these symbols for protection or reassurance. In this way, supernatural forces remained integrated with ordinary routines, offering silent support to those who sought balance. Even the most unusual creatures served a place within the larger order. They reflected natural phenomena, emotions, or transitions. Their roles reinforced the understanding that harmony included all aspects of existence, not only the familiar or comforting ones. By acknowledging these beings, Egyptians embraced a complete view of the universe, one that accepted complexity without fear. This gentle approach defined their interaction with the supernatural. They did not seek to eliminate forces that seemed unsettling. Instead, they worked with them, guiding, calming, or respecting their presence. Their rituals were soft in tone, emphasizing careful words and deliberate movements rather than intensity. Through this worldview, the Egyptians created a spiritual landscape filled with diverse beings who contributed quietly to the unfolding of existence. Each presence, whether guardian, wanderer, protector, or symbol of natural processes, played a role in maintaining balance. Together, they formed a subtle network of relationships that mirrored the complexity of the natural world. As centuries passed, these beings remained part of Egyptian belief. Their images appeared in tombs, temples, and simple household spaces. Their stories, though often understated, revealed the Egyptian trust in a universe where even mysterious forces participated in a larger harmony. In this way, extraordinary beings, monsters, and supernatural forces became part of the gentle fabric of Egyptian cosmology. They reminded people that creation included both order and potential for disorder, both clarity and mystery. By acknowledging these elements, the Egyptians strengthened their connection to the rhythms that sustain the world, embracing a quiet completeness that reflected the depth of their understanding. In the Egyptian view of existence, transformation was not unusual or extraordinary. It was a gentle principle woven into every level of the cosmos. The rising of the sun, the flooding of the river, the opening of a flower, and the slow renewal of life all reflected the same quiet idea. Nothing remained fixed. Everything moved calmly from one state to another. This steady flow shaped their understanding of gods, humans, and the relationship between the visible world and the invisible one. The gods themselves demonstrated this principle through their shifting forms. A deity could appear as human, animal, or a blended image without contradiction. These changes reflected different aspects of the same presence. The sun god moved through his cycle each day, taking on distinct forms at dawn, midday, and evening. At sunrise, he appeared young and newly formed, carrying the freshness of beginning. At noon, he embodied clarity and strength. At dusk, he settled into a calm, reflective state, preparing for the quiet journey through the night. This pattern offered a model for understanding life. People observed the sun's movement and recognized that existence unfolded through gentle transitions, each stage contributing to the whole. There was no sharp division between states, no sudden transformation. Everything developed gradually, following the same patient rhythm that guided the natural world. The myths describing the gods often included subtle metamorphoses that reflected this worldview. A goddess might shift from a nurturing form to a protective one when needed. A god associated with wisdom could appear as a bird to express the idea of clear sight. These adjustments were not dramatic events, but natural expressions of underlying qualities. They demonstrated that divine presence could adapt gently to circumstances, reflecting harmony rather than conflict. Humans also participated in this principle. The afterlife texts described how a person could take on different forms during their journey beyond life. These forms allowed the deceased to navigate spaces that required specific qualities. Transformation into a bird offered freedom of movement. Becoming a lotus allowed peaceful emergence each morning, mirroring the gentle unfolding of petals in the light. These possibilities provided reassurance that the journey into the afterlife would be supported by natural shifts aligned with familiar patterns. The ability to transform was closely connected to knowledge. In Egyptian belief, understanding the names of things granted access to their essence. A name was more than an identifying label. It was a quiet reflection of being. To know the true name of a god or a place allowed a person to move gently within the structure of the cosmos. This understanding informed many rituals in which priests recited names carefully, maintaining the flow of order through precise speech. The importance of names extended to people as well. A person had several names, each with its own purpose. One might be used in daily life, another in ritual contexts, and another preserved for the afterlife. These names ensured continuity, allowing the person to remain present across different states of existence. Speaking a name during funerary rites helped guide the deceased through transitions, reaffirming their identity in gentle tones. Magic, known as Heka, was the natural extension of these beliefs. It was not considered supernatural or separate from everyday life. It was the quiet force that allowed things to function as they should. Heka was present in speech, ritual, medicine, craftsmanship, and even in the simple act of naming. It represented the capacity to shape reality through alignment with cosmic patterns. In creation myths, Heka existed before the world took form. It was described as the power that allowed the gods to act, the principle that animated their words and intentions. Because of this, magic was not limited to priests or specialists. Every person carried a measure of Heka, enabling them to participate in the gentle shaping of their lives. Magical practices often focused on maintaining balance rather than creating change. A ritual might protect a household from subtle disturbances or support a traveler on a long journey. Amulets inscribed with prayers and symbols offered quiet reassurance. These objects did not exert force. They provided a connection to stabilizing patterns, helping the wearer remain aligned with harmony. Healing involved both physical care and spoken formulas. A healer might prepare a remedy from herbs, minerals, or oils, then recite words that connected the patient to a deity who had overcome a similar ailment. This approach acknowledged both material and spiritual dimensions. The spoken words did not replace practical treatment. They reinforced it, recognizing that well-being required alignment across all levels of existence. Certain rituals focused on transformation. In funerary contexts, the opening of the mouth ceremony restored the senses of the deceased. This ritual symbolized awakening into a new form of being, allowing the person to breathe, see, and speak in the afterlife. Priests performed the movements slowly, using tools shaped from metal or wood. The gestures reflected centuries of tradition, carried out with calm precision. Other rituals prepared statues to serve as vessels for divine presence. Through careful recitation and symbolic touch, a statue transitioned from simple material to living image. The moment of transformation did not involve sudden change. It was understood as a quiet shift in which the divine essence moved gently into its new form. The statue then received offerings and served as a point of contact between humans and the gods. Magic also influenced the design of protective objects. Amulets shaped like animals, symbols, or small figures were placed among the wrappings of a mummy. Each amulet supported a different aspect of the transition. One might protect the heart, another ensured safe passage through the afterlife. Others strengthened the connection between the ba and the body. Their placement followed deliberate patterns, reflecting the Egyptian belief that order required attentive detail. The spoken component of magic emphasized clarity and intention. Ritual texts often instructed practitioners to speak calmly with steady breath. The power of the words came not from volume or intensity, but from alignment with cosmic truth. Proper pronunciation, gentle pacing, and clear intention ensured that the words resonated with the structure of the universe. Magical texts were preserved carefully in houses of life, spaces within temples dedicated to study and copying. Scribes learned these texts with patience, understanding that their effectiveness depended on accurate transmission. The process of writing itself held magical significance. Ink, papyrus, and reed pens all carried symbolic meaning. The act of forming hieroglyphs connected the scribe to the long tradition of shaping reality through written language. Some magical practices involved symbolic substitution. A figurine might represent a concern or illness. By performing a ritual on the figurine, practitioners guided the issue toward resolution. Once the ritual concluded, the figurine was destroyed or buried, signifying the gentle release of tension. This practice reflected the principle that the part could stand for the whole, allowing subtle forces to be guided through symbolic action. Magic also played a role in agriculture. Farmers recited formulas to support the growth of crops, drawing connections between their work and the steady rhythms of the natural world. They sought harmony with the Nile's cycles, recognizing that their efforts aligned with broader patterns. These rituals were simple and quiet, reinforcing the idea that everyday activities could participate in cosmic order. In some myths, the goddess Isis demonstrated the highest expression of Heka. Her actions reflected deep knowledge and patience. Through careful words and steady resolve, she supported her husband and protected her son. Her example showed that magic did not require force. It required understanding, intention, and alignment with truth. This gentle approach became a model for human practitioners, encouraging them to act with clarity and calm. The Egyptians recognized that magic could be used carelessly or with harmful intention, yet they viewed such misuse as a departure from harmony rather than a separate category of power. Ritual texts emphasized that true Heka aligned with Ma'at. Actions that disrupted balance moved toward disorder and lost their connection to cosmic support. The boundary between magic and daily life remained fluid. People invoked protective words when traveling, working, or resting. They placed symbols in their homes and carried small amulets with them. These practices offered comfort, reinforcing the belief that the universe responded to gentle intention. The idea of transformation also extended to time. Festivals marked moments when cosmic cycles refreshed themselves. During these occasions, temples performed rituals that echoed creation, the renewal of divine presence in statues and sacred spaces followed patterns established in ancient times. The people participated through quiet observation, trusting that the rituals supported the continuation of order. Even in the afterlife, transformation remained central. Texts described different stages of becoming, each one unfolding gradually. The deceased moved through these states with support from familiar forces. Spells provided guidance for recognizing gates, guardians, and opportunities for renewal. These instructions encouraged awareness rather than tension, helping the traveler navigate gently. Over centuries, the concept of transformation remained consistent, whether experienced through natural cycles, rituals, healing practices, or stories. It reflected the Egyptian understanding that change occurred quietly, guided by underlying patterns. This belief allowed people to approach life and death with trust, recognizing that each transition continued the same steady rhythm. In this worldview, magic and transformation were not extraordinary events. They were the subtle movements that shaped existence. Through them, Egyptians connected daily life to cosmic order, honoring the gentle flow that guided all things. This perspective offered a sense of calm continuity, allowing people to feel supported by the same rhythms that sustained the gods, the natural world, and the universe itself. As the long centuries passed, the religious landscape of Egypt began to shift gently. The traditions that had guided countless generations remained steady, yet the world surrounding them changed slowly. Foreign powers entered the land, new languages appeared in the streets, and distant beliefs reached the Nile Valley. These transitions unfolded gradually, like the movement of a river adjusting its course over time. Despite these changes, the Egyptians continued to honor their gods with the same calm rhythms that had shaped earlier eras. Temples remained active, rituals were performed, and priests maintained the knowledge preserved in sacred writings. Even as new rulers arrived, the essential framework of the old religion endured. The temples of the late period displayed familiar images, suggesting continuity rather than disruption. When Greek influence entered Egypt, the blending of traditions produced gentle adjustments. Greek rulers adopted the outward symbols of Egyptian kingship, wearing the crowns, performing the rites, and presenting themselves in temple reliefs according to established patterns. The gods of both cultures were sometimes linked through thoughtful associations, creating new forms that bridged the beliefs of different peoples. These changes unfolded quietly, showing that adaptation could occur without dismantling the older structure. During the Roman period, the temples continued to function, and the imagery of divine kingship remained. Emperors appeared in traditional poses, offering incense or lifting symbols of order. Although the political nature of rule had changed, the spiritual dimension persisted. Egyptians still carried amulets, recited prayers, and followed rituals that had comforted their ancestors. Over time, however, new spiritual movements began to spread across the region. These movements introduced different ideas about divinity, time, and salvation. Their presence grew steadily, especially in urban centers. The gentle blending that had characterized earlier periods became more difficult as newer beliefs emphasized exclusivity. Temples that had once served as centers of daily order found fewer visitors. Rituals were performed less often, and the priesthood gradually diminished. As generations passed, the older religion entered a quiet decline. It did not vanish abruptly. Instead, it faded slowly, like the soft dimming of light at dusk. Temples remained standing though their chambers grew silent, walls still displayed scenes of gods receiving offerings, yet fewer people understood the significance of these images. The language of hieroglyphs, once used for sacred texts, became less familiar. The knowledge required to interpret it grew increasingly rare. Eventually, the last active temple continued its rituals on an island near the southern border. For a time, it stood as the final place where the old practices were carried out. Pilgrims traveled to its peaceful courtyards, offering prayers that echoed those of distant ancestors. When the temple finally closed, the long tradition of official worship came to an end. The gods who had once shaped every aspect of daily life were no longer honored through organized rites, yet their memory remained present in quieter forms. Even after formal worship faded, traces of the older beliefs persisted within local customs. Some families maintained small practices that resembled ancient rituals, blending them with new traditions. Protective symbols continued to appear in homes. Simple formulas, passed from one generation to another, echoed fragments of the older worldview. These quiet remnants reflected the enduring comfort that the ancient patterns had provided. The memory of Egypt's gods and myths entered a new phase through the writings of travelers and scholars from other cultures. These observers described what they saw, offering their own interpretations of temples, statues, and ceremonies. Their accounts preserved certain narratives, but often filtered them through different perspectives. As a result, the stories of the gods took on altered shapes, influenced by the languages and philosophies of those who recorded them. In time, the ability to read hieroglyphs was lost entirely. The sacred writings carved on temple walls and written on papyrus scrolls became silent. For many centuries, people could see the symbols but could not understand them. They appeared as mysterious pictures, suggesting deeper meaning but revealing little. The myths, prayers, and rituals recorded in those texts remained hidden, known only through distant retellings. As centuries passed, new layers of interpretation formed. Medieval scholars imagined the symbols represented secret wisdom. Renaissance thinkers developed theories based on symbolic readings rather than linguistic understanding. These interpretations, though creative, did not reflect the original meaning of the texts. Egyptian mythology existed in fragments, separated from its roots. A renewed interest in the ancient world gradually grew during later centuries, leading explorers and researchers to visit Egypt once again. They documented temples, copied inscriptions, and described monuments that had stood for thousands of years. Drawings and notes brought this information back to distant countries, inspiring those who saw them to imagine the world of ancient Egypt with fresh curiosity. A turning point arrived when inscriptions written in multiple scripts were discovered. These inscriptions provided the key to understanding the language that had been silent for so long. Through careful study, scholars identified patterns, compared symbols, and gradually revealed the meaning of hieroglyphs, the language that had once carried prayers and offerings became readable again, restoring access to the original voices of the ancient world. As translations progressed, the richness of Egyptian mythology became clear. Texts describing creation, divine journeys, funerary guidance, and temple rituals emerged. They provided a calm, detailed view of a worldview shaped by harmony, cycles, and gentle transitions. The stories regained their subtlety, free from earlier misunderstandings. Scholars recognized the sophistication of the old belief system, appreciating its layered understanding of life, death, and cosmic balance. The rediscovery of these texts influenced many fields. Historians, linguists, anthropologists, and artists found inspiration in the gentle rhythms of Egyptian thought. Museums displayed objects that had once served as part of daily rituals. Visitors observed them with quiet curiosity, sensing the depth of the culture that had created them. The symbols, no longer mysterious, communicated ideas about transformation, order, and connection. Egyptian mythology also entered popular imagination through novels, artworks, and films. These modern interpretations often reshaped the stories, emphasizing dramatic elements or creating new narratives. Although these versions differed from the calm worldview of the original myths, they kept the imagery alive. People recognized the forms of the gods, the poses of the kings, and the symbols of protection. Even when altered, these images connected modern viewers to a distant past. At the same time, scholarly research continued to uncover new information. Excavations revealed tombs, papyri, and temples that added details to the understanding of older texts. Each discovery expanded the quiet landscape of Egyptian mythology, allowing new generations to explore its depth. Digital technologies made inscriptions accessible to people around the world, offering a broader view of the tradition than ever before. Through these developments, Egyptian mythology entered a new phase of existence. It no longer shaped the daily lives of a living community, yet it remained present in cultural memory. The gods did not receive offerings, but their stories continued to circulate. The rituals were not performed, yet their structure was studied and appreciated. The symbols carved on ancient walls still conveyed a sense of calm order to those who viewed them. This gentle persistence reflected the core qualities of the mythology itself. Just as the sun renewed itself each day, the ancient stories found ways to continue through time. They adapted to changing languages, new interpretations, and shifting cultural contexts. Though transformed, they preserved their essence, a quiet reflection on existence grounded in balance, continuity, and the steady rhythm of nature. In the modern world, people encounter Egyptian mythology in many forms. Some experience it through museum exhibits, observing statues and inscriptions that once held sacred meaning. Others read translations of ancient texts, discovering the slow, measured tone that guided funerary rituals and temple hymns, still others meet the myths through retellings in literature and media, where the old imagery continues to inspire imagination. Despite the distance between ancient Egypt and the present, the calm perspective expressed in the myths resonates with contemporary audiences. The emphasis on cycles, harmony, and gentle transitions offers a sense of stability. The idea that existence continues beyond visible boundaries, supported by familiar patterns, provides quiet reassurance. The presence of protective beings, guiding deities, and steady cosmic rhythms speaks to universal concerns about life and its changes. As the long arc of history continues, Egyptian mythology remains a testament to the human desire to understand the world with patience and care. Its longevity reflects not only the strength of its symbols, but the enduring appeal of a worldview grounded in balance. The ancient Egyptians observed the natural world with deep attention, finding in its movements a guide for their spiritual beliefs. These observations shaped a tradition that continues to touch those who explore it today through rediscovery, study, and quiet appreciation. Egyptian mythology has found a new form of life, one shaped not by temples or offerings, but by memory and reflection. It endures in the calm lines of hieroglyphs, the steady posture of statues, and the gentle cycles described in ancient texts. In this continued presence, the myths remain connected to the rhythms they once expressed, inviting those who encounter them to pause, observe, and move gently through the landscape of time.